I think Jack Kirby put it best when he said, "Comics will break your heart, kid." Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where we create robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. We also create comics, and not too long ago I wrapped up an entire series just on how to make comics called Making Comics 101. I will leave a link to that at the end of this video, to that playlist where you can check that out if that's something that you're interested in, and chances are if you clicked on this you might be, because we're talking about comics again today, something we talk about a lot on this channel. But that series was a huge undertaking, and if you are interested in learning how to make comics, it's step by step. It takes you all the way from coming up with your ideas all the way to the finished product, printing, publishing, and pretty much everything in between. So when I put out this course, naturally people are going to come across it, and there is this inclination to wonder, well, you know, who is this guy and what authority does he have to speak on comics? Has he worked for Marvel or DC, or does he know what he's talking about? And I can understand that, and I think if you do watch the course, you can probably surmise that yes, I have a lot of experience creating comics, but no, I have never worked for Marvel or DC, and I know there are a lot of people out there that sort of use that as a gauge to whether you are a professional comic book artist, if you've worked for the big two, or even some of the other well-known comic book companies. And like I said, I've never done any work for Marvel or DC or really any major comic book company. But when I hear that, I take a little bit of umbrage at that line of thinking that you have to have worked for one of these well-known comic book companies in order to be considered a professional comic book creator, publisher, because not everyone has that desire. For as far back as I remember, I've just been interested in doing my own thing, being an indie comic creator. Now, going way back, back in the 90s, I did some samples and I did some submissions to Marvel and DC using some of their characters, but by and large, that was a very short period of time when I was first kind of getting started. Because as a kid, that's pretty much your world. That's what you go to, at least in my age group and everything, you go to the newsstand and later the comic book stores, and that's what you see, a lot of that. And of course there were some indie comics coming up too that I really admired and everything. And don't get me wrong, I love Marvel, DC characters, all that stuff. I love, the characters from popular culture, licensed characters that you're seeing a lot that are, you could technically call them independent comic book companies if they're not the big two. Sometimes people just lump every other comic book company as an independent, which I think independent has a little different connotation to it. But back when I was quote unquote trying to break into comics, I would send a lot of my original ideas for stories and things, not knowing that that's really not how it works, and you kind of have to educate yourself, and you learn a lot along the way, and you sort of start to learn how that business is run. And that's pretty much what this video is going to be about. The reason why I haven't really had a big desire to work for those companies, and I really just want to fight against this idea that if you're not, if you haven't worked for a well-known title or one of the big companies, that you're not a professional comic book creator, because there are a lot of benefits to working independently as an artist, doing your own thing, publishing your own books, self-publishing. And there are a lot of major drawbacks to the comic industry. The comic industry in general, it's fraught with a lot of real issues, especially pertaining to creators and creators' rights. So I just kind of want to dive into that and explain why I've never really pursued working for those companies. And that's not because I don't like what they put out. I love the product and everything. Same thing with Disney. I love Disneyland. I love all that stuff. I love what they're putting out there. And of course that is Marvel now. But some of the behind the scenes stuff, it's not so great. And I just want to bring that to light and kind of maybe educate you guys. And it's a choice. Some people, that's, they want to work on Spider-Man and X-Men, and I totally understand that. But I think you have to know what you're getting into if that's sort of your goal. And I want to sort of persuade you maybe with some alternatives. And having said all this, I don't want you to think that I'm like ride or die, don't ever work for Marvel or DC Comics. And even though I have never pursued really submitting anything to them or really had any desire to work for Marvel or DC, that isn't to say that if they contacted me, and it would have to be a unique scenario, I think, because I don't think my artwork, the kind of artwork that I do, is anything that they're interested in. But you never know. Sometimes they want to flip the script and do something kind of out of the box or whatever, and they will reach out to sort of unconventional comic book artists, or people are doing something different than what usually comes out. And you see, I mean, you're seeing more of that nowadays, and that's cool. But just know, if that was the case, I would know what I'm getting into. I would know sort of, I'm going to be relinquishing a lot of my rights. I'm going to be taking probably a major cut in pay from what I usually charge a client to do comic book work. And that's just the way it is. So let's kind of dive into sort of the history of comics and creator ownership and creator rights. And this may be sort of a mini series. I may break this off into some other smaller videos, but just to jump up, I want to go back to what I was saying in the beginning with this famous quote by Jack Kirby that says, "Comics will break your heart, kid." And I'm sure if Jack Kirby were alive today, there would probably be sort of a caveat to this statement, because I know that Jack Kirby loved comics. I love comics, but it had, like I said, it's got its issues, and Jack Kirby dealt with a lot of these, this problem, throughout his career. As much as he loved comics, I mean, it's almost like with any relationship. I mean, you could give love and you can put love out there, but sometimes it doesn't always come back to you. And that's sort of the sad thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean you love it any less. It's just that that's kind of the way it is. And that's sort of, I think that was sort of Jack's relationship with comics. And of course, I can't speak for him. And just knowing some of the battles that he had in his career and some of the other issues that many other comic book creators dealt with along the way and are still dealing with today, it's a little unfortunate that this thing that we love so much is so, problematic. Now, as I've mentioned, I've never really worked for Marvel or DC, but I do consider myself a professional comic book artist. I have done tons of paid gigs making comics. I have my own creator-owned comic book, Young and the Dead, and I've produced comic books for a number of different clients. I've worked for companies like, Viacom, Warner Brothers. So I've worked for major companies, sort of outside of comics, more in the sort of advertising sphere. And I'll get to some different options and things, because you can work in comics, you can create comics, and maybe even make a more comfortable living than you could working for a Marvel or DC. Or even there's offshoots, like the people that are designing, this is sort of the sad part, but the people that are designing the packaging for like the toys featuring Marvel comic characters, or all these different ancillary, products and other areas featuring comic book heroes and storylines and things like that, those often get paid quite a bit more than the actual comics themselves. And that's pretty messed up. And you can kind of even see this when you go to like a convention. Just the value of the comic book itself, it's crazy, because when you go to a convention, you see people that are, say they're creating their own comic books, and let's say they sell their comics, usually independent comics sell like a floppy or whatever might sell for around $5. But as independent comic book creators, we don't always have a whole team and everything working on it. We don't have all that infrastructure. So we kind of, in order to make up, and we're not selling a massive amount of copies, so we tend to have to price our comic books a little more. So I would say on average right now it's about $5. So, but the amount of work that goes into creating even a single floppy issues for an independent comic book where you're writing it, you're doing all the artwork yourself, pretty much producing it yourself, it can take months. It's not like, that monthly schedule where you're putting one out every month, because you don't have that, support system around you that's helping you along the way. It's not that assembly line where one person inks, one person pencils, one person inks, colors, and all that. It's that's sort of a team effort, where independence, it's, you've got to do it all yourself. So anyway, so you put all this work into a book, and then you're selling it for like $5, and then you'll notice that $5 book, and it's also sad because when you go to a convention, comic books don't sell as much nowadays at comic convention. There are people like myself that do seek out independent comics at comic book conventions and things, but what you see a lot of is, prints and things like that. So you've got a print up there that you're selling, somebody's selling for what, $20 or more. somewhere in that price range, versus a comic book that takes way more time. A print, you know, it's basically one drawing, and of course there's different levels. Somebody can put a lot of time into one print. It could be fully painted, all those different things. But anyway, by and large, a print is going to take you a small fraction of the time that a comic book does. Yet the value of that comic, $5, versus a print that you can just bang a bunch of them out and just put them out there, and you're selling for like 20 bucks a pop. It just goes to show you sort of how crazy the value is that we put, or that we don't put, on all the amount of artwork that and creation time and all this imagination, everything that goes into creating a comic book. And that sort of permeates through the whole industry as far as what the worth of a comic book is. And like many other areas, it's the people that are creating the comics that are sort of, in a lot of cases, getting the shaft, while the people at the top are, you know, making the lion's share of the profits and everything. So because the comics I create fall more under this sort of advertising model, which is very different. When you're creating professional illustrations, there are guidelines and industry standards which most people come to expect when you're working with clients, at least clients or agencies that know, you know, about the business and everything. Whereas in comics, it's that kind of, a lot of that is just out the window, which is really, really strange. So when you're a professional illustrator, a freelance illustrator, you are a contractor. People hire you to illustrate something, whether that's comics or package design or whatever the case is. And when you are an independent contractor, anything you create, and this is something a lot of people don't understand, but anything you create, you own it. Unless you specifically transfer those rights via a contract to somebody else, you still own that. And that's expected in the, you know, the fields of advertising, but comics, it's a little different. In comics, it's more of a work for hire situation, but it's not a typical work for hire situation. So work for hire would be like if you're working on staff at a company and everything, you go into their office, you know, there's a desk there for you, they've got their, you know, they're supplying their computer, health insurance, all this other stuff. That is a typical work for hire situation. But with comics, it's a little bit different, where they're trying to take, you know, they're trying to get the best of both worlds, where they're hiring independent contractors, which means they don't have to supply you with a computer, they don't have to supply you with health insurance, any of that stuff. But the weird trade-off is they want all the artwork and everything, they want to own that as well. And it's really bizarre, especially considering the amount of money or lack thereof that comic book creators, the big two, and definitely the smaller, more quote-unquote independent publishers pay out. The page rates, they're just not that good. They're maybe a little more than what a typical, I mean, it's a page rate, and that usually it takes, on average, I would say about a day to complete a piece of artwork, for a penciler to complete a piece of artwork for a comic book, more or less. Yeah, it depends on your speed, amounts of detail, all that stuff. But the page rates, you know, they're slightly less than what a typical professional illustrator might charge to do an hour's worth of work. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not in any big rush to go out and work for Marvel or DC. Now, there are some other benefits to working for Marvel or DC other than what little usually they're getting paid. So when you're working for a bigger publisher, comparatively, you're getting paid way less, and they get to keep everything. I mean, unless they don't have you sign a contract, which I've never heard of a major comic book publisher not, you know, making you sign a contract, because that's how, like I said, that's how the rights get transferred. So anything you create, any character that you introduce or anything is created by them. Now, there have been some, you know, progress made in that area. We'll get into a little more about that, but it's still not ideal. But the thing is, we all love these characters. We all love Spider-Man, the Hulk, Batman, Superman, all these characters. We love them. People know them, and we want to work on them, and that is sort of where their leverage is. That's, you know, they know that you want to work on these things, and they know that a lot of people, they'd work on it for free if they had an opportunity, and they take advantage of that. So they can pretty much make any offer they want, and there's a lot of people to be like, oh yeah, I'll do it, whatever it takes. And I guess there could be some sort of strategy to that, because one of the good things is if you are working on those characters, it's going to help build your audience. It's going to build your name recognition. And when you see people that do, I mean, a lot of the people that do work for Marvel, DC, whoever, maybe they're not making that great of a page rate, and maybe they are. And again, everything is relative. You know, there are comic book artists that are making millions. I mean, the Todd McFarlanes and all of these guys, the big names, they're doing great, and they're probably getting paid a really nice page rate and everything because they're in demand. But it's sort of like, actors. If you were to ask somebody, do actors make a lot of money? Well, that depends. If you're a big movie star, you're making millions, but there's that whole idea of the struggling actor. So for every one person at the top, there's about 100 people below them that are just scraping by. So just keep that in mind. So I'm not going to say that if you don't work for Marvel or DC or whatever, that there's no chance that you'll ever make any money. I mean, you could become the next big thing and everything, and the more power to those people. That's awesome. There's always those success stories. So yeah, I like to hear those, but just know that that's typically not the norm. But you can get on a Marvel or DC title and build a name and a reputation for yourself. And once you do that, you can go to conventions and you can clean up doing sketches and things. You could probably make a lot more doing sketches that you could, which you're actually getting paid for. So there are some benefits in that regard. And people do, like I mentioned in the beginning, people have a lot more respect if you can say that, yeah, I work on this Marvel comic or this DC comic, or whatever is Image, IDW, any Boom Studios, whatever the case is. Some of those, it means a lot when you say that, rather than just, yeah, I self-produce my own comic. But name recognition isn't the only thing, because a lot of the creators that we know and love from history of creating some of the most iconic heroes and comic book characters, it didn't matter how famous they were. I mean, some of them, we talked about Jack Kirby, some of the struggles with him in the beginning, not getting his art back and just being treated so poorly, having to go, leave Marvel to go to DC, and that worked out for a little while, and then it was the same thing over and over again. Just throughout his career, for creating all these iconic characters and just not really, at least in the beginning, getting the credit or the benefits that come along with creating something that's bringing in millions of dollars. I mean, look at Siegel and Schuster, who created Superman. I mean, for a long time, and even towards the end of their life, I mean, they were basically getting by. And even putting aside monetary compensation for this iconic character Superman that they created, they didn't even get a created by credit till, I forgot if it was Siegel or Schuster who passed away first, but it was the end of their lives or after their lives that they actually got that credit. And that was in large part due to Neil Adams, who has really fought for creator ownership. At one point, he tried to even unionize the comic book industry and create a comic book creators guild. That didn't actually happen. There's a lot of things that came from that that were helpful. So I mean, like I said, getting at least some compensation so that Siegel and Schuster weren't just out on the street, just enough for them to just live in basically a very modest apartment and everything, and live the rest of their lives. I mean, it's considering you can't talk to somebody who doesn't know who Superman is. These guys created it, and it's sad. And Neil Adams also more recently kind of helped bring to life the career of Bill Finger, who was largely unnoticed for his contributions, and some people even saying maybe the majority of Batman. And so there are people out there trying to fight, and there have been strides with people trying to change the industry, but it's sort of slow going. I mean, we're at a point right now where, yes, if you do work for Marvel or DC, you do get to own your physical artwork. That was a big battle with Jack Kirby getting his artwork back. Now if you do that, that's pretty much standard practice, that you do get your artwork back, and you can sell that artwork again for way more than you're probably getting paid for that page rate, if it's a if it's a popular title, or depending on what kind of artist you are, if that's in demand, or the character, or if there's a something big going on. Those original comic book pages can sometimes make up for the difference of of some of these really low page rates. And we'll get into page rates. I think I'll do another video and just kind of let people know what some of these page rates are. And in addition to that, I will probably do another video on sort of the Comic Creators Bill of Rights that Scott McCloud initiated. It didn't actually materialize like a lot of these efforts to try to change the comic book industry, but there's still these rules that I think are something you should know about and something that I would, you know, try to follow in your own career. So we'll get into that. Well, like I said, I want to do a series of sort of the benefits of indie or just creator rights and creator ownership and just knowing what you're getting into with this business, because I think some people enter this with rose-colored glasses and they just think, oh man, this is, if I could just become a comic book artist, it's going to be great and everything. And there's just this, you know, really unfortunate history, and a lot of that stuff is still around today. So I just want you to be aware of this, because when I do these videos, this whole channel is, a lot of it is for creators, because I want, if you have a desire to earn money from your art, I mean, that's a lot of the content that I do here, and that's not everyone's goal. And if you just want to learn how to draw or be a better artist, whenever, that's fine too. But I still, you know, I've learned a lot in the amount of time I've been doing this, and I just want to give back, and I want people to be aware of this stuff, and I just don't want people to be taken advantage of. And whether you want to work for a company, you know, a big company, and you know what you're getting into, that's fine, as long as you know. You just have to be aware is basically the point I'm trying to make. So there have been a lot of efforts to sort of reform this industry. Like I said, a lot of them didn't really get a good foothold, and it just kind of fell apart. Whether that was efforts to unionize the comic book industry or creating this sort of document that would be the Comic Creators Bill of Rights. But there are some things that have sort of been somewhat of a success as a result of efforts from comic creator advocates like Neil Adams, Scott McCloud. In recent years, there have been some welcome positive changes in some of the things we're seeing as far as rights for creators. For example, some of the major publishers are now offering creators some royalties if characters that they create end up in other media, film, or whatever the case is. That's a step in the right direction. Also, in some instances, artists are receiving royalties if their comic books sell a certain amount. It's a pretty high amount, but that's good, because I mean, that's what you need, because the more these comics sell, the bigger they get, and the more benefit some of these companies are getting. At least the creator should be getting a little bit of that. So if a company is reprinted in a trade or sells a certain amount, again, that's sort of the higher tiers. There are some royalties that are now being paid to creators. So these are positive signs of hopefully more things like that to come. Like there's, you know, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which will help artists if they run into, you know, if their work has been co-opted or stolen, or a number of different reasons, any kind of reason that you might need legal counsel or something having to do with your art and everything. That's out there. That's a great organization. The other one is the Hero Initiative, which really helps, because the industry is so bad and because there are so many older creators that, you know, they get to that point where, I mean, it's like they've done all this awesome stuff that people love, and maybe they can't work anymore, or whatever the case is, or because of the way this whole thing is structured, they don't have any retirement. That organization kind of helps them out. And you know, there's a lot of these horror stories. Like the one that really gets me and really kind of chokes me up is sort of the story of Bill Mantlo. And if you're not familiar with Bill Mantlo, he created Rocket Raccoon, also, or co-created Rocket Raccoon, Cloak and Dagger, a number of other, you know, well-known comic book creators. But he was in an automobile accident, or he was struck by an automobile. I think he was rollerblading or something. And so, you know, he, you know, in the hospital, you know, major surgery, all these hospital bills ranking up. And this is at the time that Guardians of the Galaxy, which featured prominently Rocket Raccoon, a character he created, was about to premiere and everything. And there's sort of this story of how he's in the hospital. And the way the story was written, in my memory, was, it kind of always, you know, rubbed me the wrong way, because it's like Marvel makes a special, screening for Bill Mantlo to see his character Rocket Raccoon while he's in the hospital and everything. And so they made this. They premiered it so you can see it in there, and that's great. But I mean, come on, the guy created this character. They're making millions of dollars, and what ends up happening is there has to be like a GoFundMe page to help raise money so that Bill Mantlo can pay for his doctor bills. When this movie, like I said, I mean, there's how many characters are, 5 major characters in the Guardians of the Galaxy. One of those characters he created, one of those very beloved characters he created, and this is it. That's what you get. Oh, how nice! That's so nice that you actually got to let him watch the movie. I mean, this is the stuff that just drives me a little bit crazy when it comes to this stuff. But this is the stuff I want you to be aware of. But fortunately, there are organizations like the Hero Initiative that are there to help creators like that in their time of need and everything. And we need more of that. But we wouldn't need those kind of organizations if creators were just treated fairly and compensated for their work and given the credit for the things that they created. But unfortunately, that's not really a reality, at least not in the reality that we're living in. Maybe there's a multiverse somewhere out there where things are different. That's a place I might like to live in, and maybe even actually pursue working for a Marvel or DC, but that's not really the case. There's a lot more I want to talk about on this topic, but we are getting close to like 25 minutes. I don't want this to go too long, so I think what I might do is sort of break this up into 2 parts. So I'll have another video where I go a little further in depth and maybe give you some examples of some other routes that you can take, or some red flags that you might get when you're listening to some of the feedback from comic book publishers on the reason why maybe they can't pay a decent wage or anything. So we'll get into that. That video will probably be maybe just in a couple days. I won't wait too long to put that out, but I do want to break this up. So when you hear that quote from Jack Kirby that's comics will break your heart, kid, know what it's all about, because we all love comics. Jack Kirby loved comics, but comics has kind of a sad history of how it treats its creators, and unfortunately I think a lot of that is still going on today. We've made a little bit of progress, but it's we've got a long way to go. And yeah, so that's about all I have to say today. I'll see you guys later. That is all.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.